Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We see in the United Nations, although there have been moves for sanctions and there have been resolutions incurring sanctions on Iran, nevertheless, Russia, China have been problematic. I would like to ask you what you think Russia and China will continue to do, and if they will continue to present the same kind of problems they have up until now, when a time when we'd like to see strengthened sanctions.
Betty Ehrenberg, thank you for that question, because it is the question of the hour. We are about to see, I call September crunch month. It's crunch month because the G8 a few months ago said Iran has until the G20 meeting in September in Pittsburgh to respond to President Obama's repeated overtures to Tehran. It's also the crunch month because the Security Council will be convening, and actually, I think this has never occurred before, President Obama will be sitting in the Security Council himself, because in the rotating presidency of the Security Council, the United States has the presidency for the month of September. And they will be discussing nuclear non-proliferation, which obviously has implications for Iran, but could be defined more broadly as well. So the question is, will the Obama administration feel compelled to insist upon a consensus of all the members of the Security Council before taking any further action on Iran? The tendency, from what I hear, is to seek that kind of consensus as a prerequisite for positive action. When I studied the development of the resolutions back in 2006 and 2007 on Iran, the Russian ambassador, I have to say, showed tremendous expertise in gutting UN resolutions that still looked like they were doing something, but removing a lot of the teeth from those resolutions. And that's a big danger if you go and rely on the Security Council alone. I think because the vital interests of the United States and its Western allies are involved, it may be necessary to work with a coalition of the willing and not wait for the Security Council to act. I remind you, not just in the controversy over the Iraq War did the United States skirt around the Security Council. In Kosovo, where the Clinton administration took deliberate action against the Yugoslav government, President Clinton did not rely on Security Council authorization. So we are not now talking about war, but we're talking about our extremely painful sanctions that have never been tried before. I think there's a chance, I think they should be given a chance, but only for a very brief period of time. The clock is running out. And therefore, if we find the Obama administration, for example, saying, let's give them another 6 months, we'll talk about it. Very dangerous. All you're doing is putting off any serious action against Iran and allowing the Iranians to get closer to the nuclear finishing line. This is a serious moment in time.
Questions? We have several UN ambassadors here. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I think it's really important conference you gave us, and Ambassador of Italy too. Ambassador Gold mentioned the reaction of the countries, Arab countries, especially countries in the Gulf area, and of course it was very well noticed and well known the great concern in Bahrain and also in the Arab world about articles and claims, hidden or explicit claims concerning an expansionist approach of the Iranian leaders. But what is in fact the true perception in the different Gulf countries? Because some of them seem quite inclined to understand that they have to live also with the reality which may lead to a nuclear Iran and not directly appearing as opponent to that reality. Some of them appear not clearly aligned
on the risk factor of the Iranian research intended to have military purposes. So what is your understanding, Ambassador Gold, about the reality which appears to be, at least to our eyes, to our European eyes, more complex than simply a concern or directly oriented towards the Iranian behavior?
It's a very good question. The Arab states of the Gulf basically face two choices: to actively oppose Iranian expansionism in alliance with the United States, or to appease Iran and basically join the Iranian camp. Those are the two basic choices. There may be various shades of gray in between, or double games that will be tried, but that's it. Which means the resolve of the West is critical for the decision they take. And I'll give you a specific example. At the end of 2007, the American intelligence community came out with a very unfortunate document called the National Intelligence Estimate. In the shortened summary of this document, it said in point 1 that Iran froze its nuclear program in 2003. It has an asterisk or a footnote below explaining what portions of the nuclear program were frozen, not the whole program. Israel disagreed with that assessment. As far as I know, the UK, MI6, disagreed with that assessment. That's what came out in the Daily Telegraph. But for many Arab states who saw that the United States in the end of 2007 was putting out assessments that the nuclear program in Iran was halted in 2003, that meant to them that the United States was pulling back from defending them against Iran. Now, one Arab state in the Gulf reached a conclusion. That state is called Qatar, where the United States has a large air base, where it has close strategic relations. Qatar went to the dark side. They went over to the Iranians. And the Qataris concluded that was it. The game was up. Now, there are still other Arab states in the Gulf who have not taken the decision that Qatar took. Oman has a very complex traditional relationship with Iran that goes back many years. And they still also cooperate with the Iranians and talk to the West. But the others fear of the establishment of Iranian hegemony. According to Woodward, in one of his books on the Bush administration, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia said to President Bush, "In Iraq, you are helping recreate the Safavid Empire." The Safavid Empire was the Iranian Empire of the 16th century, which included Baghdad in the west, included Afghanistan in the east, and stretched into Central Asia. That is a concern, that is a perception that exists on the Arab side. Whether they decide to adopt the Qatari model, to use a term from the Cold War, which I would call Finlandization, whether they decide to adopt the Qatari model or choose to ally themselves with the West to resist Iranian expansionism depends on the message they hear out of Washington. If Washington decides on more discussions and diplomatic interaction and a deadline is a deadline, there may be other states that will join Qatar. If they sense American decisiveness in dealing with this acute threat, then I think you can find allies in the Gulf that will align with the West. Al?
Is there, first off, your book is excellent.
Thank you.
Very informative. Is there a danger that if one does not respond to the Iranians in the way that you're talking about, that in fact you may have a nuclear proliferation in the region? Saudi Arabia and some other countries, they certainly have the money to protect themselves. Is that another option, or is something that may occur?
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, President Mubarak has resisted the offer of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton for a defense umbrella for the Arab states. He said he doesn't want it. So one of the chain reactions that we might see in the future would be a nuclearization of the Middle East, in which countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey decide to develop nuclear weapons. That's a a multipolar nuclear situation, not bipolar like the US Soviet Union. Much more difficult to manage. I'll tell you a scenario that I'm concerned about. Let's say the response of the United States in the month of September is unclear, is ambiguous, is stretching for time, which it could very well be. Now, how does Iran respond? What I have been looking at is what's been going on in North Korea. North Korea did something in 2002 which is called nuclear breakout. North Koreans signed agreements with the West. There were IAEA inspectors in North Korea. There were IAEA seals on North Korean equipment so that the North Koreans, they weren't using uranium, they were using, they were reprocessing rods from a plutonium generating reactor to generate weapons-grade plutonium. The substance they were producing was different than the uranium model, but the idea was the same. In 2002, North Korea tore the seals off, the International Atomic Energy Agency seals off the equipment that they had. They began producing plutonium from their spent fuel rods of their nuclear reactor. They kicked out the IAEA monitors that had been visiting North Korea, and they declared that they were no longer adhering to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In 2006 was the first North Korean nuclear test. This year in 2009 was the second North Korean nuclear test. Did anybody respond to this? Did anybody do anything about those North Korean tests? Nothing. It is rumored that Iranians were present at both tests. Whether they were or weren't isn't important. What is important is what Iran learns. When there is no Western resolve, and if there's no resolve this month in September, the likelihood of an Iranian breakout from whatever few limitations still exist in places like Natanz or Isfahan, the likelihood of that breakout increases. And so you don't just put off a problem by not being decisive in September. You set the stage for a much greater problem in the future. I didn't write that in my book. I hinted at it. But I think that is what is at stake this month.
Joanne, I'll take the last question if I may. The real question is, what type of embargo? What can the U.S. do? What can the world do? And it's very wonderful to say, stop them. How do you stop them? Do you think that a strong embargo will actually stop Ahmadinejad? Is there anything you can do that will stop them short of a military option?
Well,
How do you stop them?
Congress has been exploring legislation to put a gasoline quarantine on Iran. As most of you probably know, Iran does not have enough refinery capacity for its automobile fleet. It has to import 40%, exactly, from abroad. Now, don't wait for the United Nations Security Council to issue this quarantine. But if you say to the 4 to 5 companies that are supplying Iran with gasoline, you supply gasoline to Iran, you can't do business in the United States. You can't do business in the European Union countries. That's leverage. That's leverage that should be pursued. Will it deliver a change in Iranian behavior? I have my doubts. But it is something that can be done immediately. And if it doesn't deliver a change, in a very short amount of time, you'll have to decide on your next steps. Again, I'm an Israeli citizen. I can't tell the United States what it should do. But you have to understand what's at stake. With Iran building a terrorist presence in Latin America, this is no longer just Kiryat Shmona and Hezbollah over the border and our little problem. This is a problem for your national security. But unfortunately, as I travel in America, I think people are asleep and perhaps hoping for policies that have patently failed in the past and I don't believe will yield any change in the future. It's not a happy message. I know I want to say Happy New Year, Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova, but the only optimistic ray of light amidst this rather difficult picture is that we are not weak countries. We're only weak up here. We're only weak because we don't take the threats seriously. If we wake up and we show political will, we have the strength, economically and otherwise, to make a change. It's very general, but I really believe it's true.